right, friends, we are looking at section 3. We're skipping and moving into section, well, not skipping, you did section 2 yesterday. And before we move into section 3, which is the Protestant Reformation, again, really quickly discussing being respectful and making sure that when we talk about difficult topics like religion, that we are mindful of people's beliefs and different beliefs, because as we move into the Protestant Reformation, this will, especially for those of you members of the Catholic faith, might feel like an attack on your faith. But what we have to think about historically is that many of the issues that we talk about in world history are always the bad parts of something, right? We don't spend a whole lot of time talking about all the good people in history. Sadly, we spend a lot of time talking about people who make change or do bad things to make people want to change. And we're kind of at that part with the Catholic Church, or as, again, it would have just been called the Church. It had, as with anything that lasts for a long period of time without any challenges, had become fairly corrupt. And instead of always thinking first about the salvation of people's soul, sometimes there's been a thought about money or taking and conquering new lands. And so that's where we start with this idea of the Protestant Reformation. And when we start and begin with the few gentlemen that we're going to talk about first, their real emphasis is to change what's wrong with the church. It's not to make a new religion. It's these are the things that are wrong, and we should fix that. So that's what we'll start looking at today. And I try to be as mindful about this topic because of the implication that everything was wrong with the church. But not everything was wrong with it, just certain parts of it, which are why these men set out to fix and reform the church first, which is why we call it the Protestant Reformation, trying to reform. Okay? So if you have any questions or feel like anything might be something different than what you have heard in other places, please let me know. Hopefully you feel comfortable enough to raise your hand and ask me, but if you don't, you can send me an email or talk to me after class, okay? So we are now into section 3. And section 3 is called the Protestant Reformation. So looking at that word, we have a lot of big words and root words. The root word of Protestant is protest. So this is a protest. The root word of Reformation is to reform. So essentially, those of you that belong to the Protestant faith, you are a protest of what was happening at the time period that these gentlemen began noticing problems within the church. So our Protestant Reformation, religious reform movement that divided the Western church into Catholic and Protestant groups. So first, again and foremost, please continue to be mindful that both of these faiths are still Christian. Both of them are under the idea of Christianity. We're just going to separate that umbrella now, or we're going to separate that into an umbrella, and we're going to go off into two faiths. And already we've maybe had a little bit of the discussion that this first Protestant faith is going to be called Lutheranism, and that there's probably not anyone in here that's a Lutheran. So from this one side over here of Protestant, it's going to start to break off into many more different branches. And the importance of that and the connection that we should make between the Renaissance and the Reformation, which is why it's in this chapter, is the Renaissance encouraged us to think, the individual thinker. And from that individual thinker, the individual thinker starts looking at things in their church, starts looking at things in the sacred text and saying, I don't think this is what this was supposed to be. I don't think this would be the way that the scripture says we should be doing that. And as a result of that, we get this Protestant faith. Then within the Protestants, they're going to do the same thing. I don't think you're supposed to be baptized at birth. How can you be baptized into something that you don't know what it is? So now we're going to wait and baptize at ages where you can consent to be part of something. I don't think The idea of communion is really the body of Christ and the blood of Christ. We just think it's symbolic. So then we get another group as well. And then we'll start to splinter into all of these different groups because the Renaissance was a rebirth of humanism and to think. And splintering off, that's one of the reasons why lots of countries don't want their people to think, right? You blindly follow. It's one of the reasons why, as a teacher, my goal is to make you think. I hope you remember stuff about world history. I hope you remember how cool and awesome history is, and you become a lifelong learner of history and all the awesomeness that it is. But before all that, you have to think, and you have to learn how to think and put things into place for yourself, because that's the most important thing that education gives you. So that's where we're starting from. This idea of humanism, that humans individually have worth, which then means they have worth to their meanings. So the major goal of Christian humanism was to reform the Catholic Church. So all of these people at the beginning are saying, we love our church. We're dedicated to our church. Most of the people that are part of this Reformation movement, including Martin Luther, were priests. They were part of the church. It wasn't outsiders saying, it was people within the church saying, we need to fix these things. These things aren't great. And that will be where we begin trying to reform the Catholic Church. So Christian humanism, again, only wanted to reform the church. And one of the things, and again, those of you that are members of religious groups, you know that worldly way thing is usually not a good thing, right? So Christian humanists were concerned about the worldly ways of the church. And many of these people within the church that are part of these worldly ways were often men who were forced into the church to make political connections. So in this time period within the church, there are two groups of people. The group of people that feel a real calling to the church, and then a group of people who were the third son or the second son, whose family said, you're going into the church and you're going to make political connections. And typically those people do not do well because it is not a calling that they're answering. They're being told to do something. And that telling of to do something usually doesn't equate with religiousness or holiness. And so these worldly ways are these people within the church trying to gain this power, this political power, this monetary power. So Christian humanists believe that humans need to reason, and that's the thinking for yourself, and to work to improve themselves. And that inward goodness would change society one person at a time, which would in turn reform the Catholic Church. And that in any time period doesn't seem like anything too different, anything that most religions would not say that's a good thing. Everybody be as what the Christian faith would say, a witness as to what you're supposed to be like, and everybody will soon eventually watch you and want to be like you. So that's how this reform movement starts. And it starts with one of the most important people is Erasmus. He is our best known Christian humanist, Erasmus. And he devolved this idea of the philosophy of Christ. And that's what this is. Show people how to do something. And we do that with everything. Show me how to do something, and then I can do it. Just tell me, and I can't. Show me what you need for me to do. And so this is what Erasmus says. Show people how to live good lives on a daily basis to achieve salvation. And that's a very simple principle. And that's what Erasmus says people should do. Then he takes it the next step, and this is where he begins pushing a little bit on the doctrine of faith, is salvation is not based on ritual. So let's make sure we talk about what ritual means for Erasmus. Ritual is not cutting chickens' feet and having ritualistic bloodbaths with things. A ritual is something you do without thinking. So in many churches, Prayer is said in unison. So people who say prayer in unison, Erasmus says you sometimes lose the meaning. So for instance, those of you that say the Apostles' Creed, many of you can just say that and you don't even really listen to the words. I can say it and make my grocery list because I've said it all my life and just routinely say it. And Erasmus would say that is a ritual that has lost its meaning. I believe in God Father, that I can just say it in my sleep. It's not anything that has meaning. For those of you that say the Lord's Prayer together as a congregation, the same thing. That's a ritual, something that you do without thinking. And Erasmus says that's not good. You should have thought to it. Different rules. Those of you that belong to faiths that have rules about drinking or dancing or any of those things, making sure that you understand that rules have a purpose and they're not just rules. Relics. And this probably just mainly pertains to the Catholic Church about relics. And those relics would be connections with the things like splinters of wood from the crucifix, or nails from the crucifix, or the bones from the hands of St. Peter. Those relics were really important to members of the Catholic Church. But what Erasmus and later Martin Luther is going to say is those things should not be used in place of. You shouldn't just think if you collect all of these relics, you have obtained salvation. And pilgrimages. Again, those pilgrimages into the Holy Land. What he says is salvation isn't based on those things, but a religious feeling. So instead of people thinking if I collect all these things, I don't have to do all the other part. I've just collected all of these things and now I have salvation. And that's what Erasmus says is dangerous. That's not what gets you salvation. So Erasmus spreads the philosophy of Christ in order to educate and criticize the abuses of the church. And so that's what, again, Erasmus is going to do. Here's Mr. Erasmus. Now, here's the other thing that we need to think about in what Erasmus is getting ready to do. He's getting ready to criticize the church. Most often when you criticize the church, you're going to die. You're going to die. You're going to get hung. You're going to be brought before an inquisition. Two things were going to help Erasmus in this way. One, hopefully you can look at that picture and tell that he is very wealthy. Erasmus is not an average guy. He's very wealthy. He is also very smart. And he knows already in this time period that if you do and say things in a joking manner, you can get away with a lot. So he's going to write his book like satire, like Saturday Night Live. I can never stay up late enough anymore to watch that. But the point of Saturday Night Live is it walks an edge that many times if you watch it, you're not even really sure that you're supposed to laugh because, oh, God, that's a little too close to like uncomfortable feeling, right? Saturday Night Live has a lot of those. Do you guys watch that show? Does anybody watch it? If you watch it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's some of those skits that they do are like, yikes, that was just a little bit too close. That's satire. And when you do it in a funny way, you get away with a lot. Those of you that are funny and you can crack jokes, you get out of a lot of trouble. That was my husband as a little kid. He is hilarious. He's funny. He got himself out of trouble all the time because he was funny. And Erasmus is going to do the same. He's going to write The Praise of Folly, and he uses humor to criticize monks and their rules. So he makes it funny so that you can laugh, and so he doesn't get killed while he criticizes the church. And yet again, he does not want a new church. No one is thinking about a new church. The only person in this chapter that on purpose thinks about a new church is Henry VIII. He's the only one. And the only reason he needs it is he needs a divorce. And he doesn't even change it. He keeps everything the same. I just need a new name for it. None of these other people that will eventually become part of this new Protestant faith want a new faith. They just need these things to be fixed. So what do they want fixed? First is we have some really bad popes. Just like any, and we have to think sometimes as a church, as as an organization. Just like any organization, you get some bad people. And the church had gone through a run of some not so great popes. They used the office for personal gain. Some looked more like military leaders. Some of them have children. They aren't supposed to engage in that activity. We also have really bad church officials. And again, that is not exclusive to the Catholic Church. People who are in places of power that have access to lots of money aren't always doing the right thing. And so these bad church officials will be just like anyone else. They see all this money, they start putting money in their pockets. Some are more concerned about advancing their careers. And again, I think it might be odd to think about the church as a career, but that's why many of these second and third sons are put into the church, to think of it as a career, not a holy calling. And then the last one is really important. Many of the officials are incompetent, meaning they don't know the Latin required for that blessing, or the Latin required for the process of baptism. They don't know the necessary sacraments or the instructions. And that is an essential part of why you go to church, or for Catholics, why you go to Mass. When we lived in Mississippi, in the little town that we lived in, there was not a Catholic church for my mother-in-law when she came to visit. We had to go into Louisiana to find one, which that was like a 45-minute drive. We picked her up. She didn't like it. Mom, what was wrong with it? He didn't do it the right way. He did not do it the right way. So we had to find her another one. It is very important for people of faith, especially in Mass, that things happen in the way that they are supposed to. And if they're not, my salvation could be at risk. So we had people that were not taking seriously their duties. And our last one will be what happens with the people of the church. People unable to find spiritual connections. So if you were a member of this church where the priest was not doing, and I'll use my mother-in-law's words, things the right way, you lose connection with your church. And any of you that are members of faith, this is not just, doesn't just pertain to the Catholic faith. Any church that loses connection, or that spiritual connection with their people, needs to face some kind of change. So religious observances become more routine and less meaningful. And again, that's that we just do things because we're told to do things, and not with the understanding of why we do those things. People began to collect relics, and that's what this idea of buying my way to achieve salvation. I don't need to be this person. I can just buy another splinter from the crucifix. I can buy the bones of St. Peter's fingers. I can buy the head of John the Baptist. If I buy these things, I can achieve salvation. And we'll talk about indulgences much more in the next couple of slides. But people were buying indulgences. They're pieces of paper that the church is going to sell that would release someone from sin. Now, that doesn't make any sense, I think, to most people. But what this does is it gives the church a way to generate income. And so they begin selling these little pieces of paper like a Monopoly card, get out of jail free. And this will be something that really bothers Martin Luther. And then people start seeking salvation without religious connections, without making some kind of connection that I have to do things to achieve that salvation. Okay? Questions about any of that? All right, that is all we have for today. So again, I've already put your Wednesday assignment on Wednesday for those of you that are finished with the assignment from yesterday. Go ahead and make sure you got that turned in, and you can certainly start on the one today about reading about Erasmus. Or you can wait till tomorrow, whichever one. You have until 11:59 tomorrow to turn in Erasmus. And it is already posted, so you don't have to wait until tomorrow to access it. Questions, anybody?